Can everybody hear us? So when you did that, good. I think the camera is showing the floor. All right, and with that, we'll go ahead and call the Monday, April 18th, 2022 Design Review Committee meeting to order at 3:01 p.m. For the record, I can see that committee members Labrie and Hurd are on Zoom, and I also see committee member Gresham. So all members are present, as are planners Hanna, Veal, and Betty Gum, and planning official Thornborrow is present as well. And with that, we can start off with the consent agenda.
I didn't see any issues with the consent agenda, including the minutes, so I make a motion to approve.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I wasn't here for that meeting with the minutes, so do we need to split that up?
Okay,
I'll second it.
all in favor?
Aye.
All right, and moving on to old business. The first item on the agenda is a public hearing for subdivision fiscal year 2021, number 10, Petra Point Townhomes. Mr. Kolchak, we'll turn it over to you to discuss the amendments.
Hang on. There we go. Unmuted. We took the opportunity to eliminate one of the units to allow for additional parking, an open space with a picnic area, and additional landscaping. In addition to that, we also added a live screen that addressed the oncoming traffic into the subdivision to eliminate the headlights that were coming in there. We added some bike racks as well. I had the brain cramp here. I had the bike path easement modified. So we've got an easement from the neighbors to the west of us, 5-foot easement, and an additional 5 feet on our property to accommodate the 10-foot easement along the west side of the property. We also submitted a redesign of the western 3 units that were there on the design review side to give an indication of the floor plan as well as the elevation drawings. And I'm open for questions.
Any questions for Mr. Kolchak? All right, hearing none, I'll turn it over to Ms. Veal for a staff report.
Good afternoon. Let me just share my screen. All right. The applicant resubmitted new resubmittal materials on April 4th, 2022. However, there were some late submittals submitted this morning that have been added to the packet, and you can find those online. They're dated today's date and just labeled resubmittals. The resubmittals essentially were reflecting what was submitted on April 4th, but it did show new identification of 2 guest parking spaces located towards the rear of the property near the common area. Essentially, the updated site plans from April 4th included evidence of the 12-foot wide public pedestrian easement and installation, removal of 1 dwelling unit. So instead of having 8 townhome dwelling units on the vacant portion of the property, there is now 7. There is a new common lot with common open space. However, the common open space was unidentified in those resubmittals, so staff was unable to review any code compliance for the common open space. But it has been drafted as a condition in the decision document to essentially be compliant with all of that common open space section of code of 8.4L. There are bike racks, picnic tables or a picnic table on a slab, lawn, and a green wall with a 6-foot cattle panel fencing in the common area. This 6-foot cattle panel fencing is acting as part of that terminus view that was previously discussed at the last design review hearing. And then additionally, there is more landscaping within the common drive area. And again, the 2 guest parking spaces identified in today's resubmittal packet. There is an updated final plat. So the first rendition of this subdivision went from 10 lots, and that includes the 1 lot with the single family dwelling, the existing single family dwelling, to now 12 lots. Essentially, there are 4 common lots identified in the new plat, and there are 8 dwelling unit lots, with one of those 8 dwelling unit lots being the existing single family lot. There are a few items that still need to be discussed based off of previous discussions, staff bringing it up in the staff report, and then some non-compliant sections of code being identified. The first item that should be discussed by the design review committee would be the trash bin pickup conversation. The applicant has continued to propose the trash bins be collected off of Allworth Street, potentially having 14 trash bins out on Allworth, and that would be for trash and recycling. There might be additional trash bins on the street because of compost or additional services that might be provided in the future. The second item that needs to be discussed is essentially an amendment to one of the waivers that was requested and has been conditioned in the design review condition document. It's in relationship to the guest parking spaces. So it's item 2 under the general conditions, letter E, 0.5 guest parking spots for every dwelling unit, allowing for 0 guest parking spaces. That needs to be updated to 2 guest parking spaces. Even with the addition of 2 guest parking spaces, there is still that need for the waiver because the subdivision as a whole needs to provide 4 guest parking spaces, but it's only providing those 2. So the waiver still needs to be there if approved. And then just as some notes, there were updated elevations provided showing those 2 units facing Allworth Street. Just those elevations were updated. And then the fencing that was previously proposed around the subdivision and then also around the individual lots backyard areas was not re-identified in the new revisions. So staff was just noting this in the staff report to make sure that the fencing is still code compliant or making sure that it actually still exists. So the applicant will need to clarify that. And then just a few other code compliance discussions to have that made it into the staff report, but have actually been conditioned. So further discussion might not need to happen, but staff wants to make a note of it that compliance with Garden City Code 8.4G sustainable development provisions has been conditioned because an updated sustainability checklist has not been provided. This will be required prior to the approval of construction plans. And that is a condition in the decision document again. And then the site plan submitted on April 4th, 2022 includes the proposal of the existing trees to remain. Of However, of the proposed trees, there's only one varietal of tree, and that's the Franz Fontaine columnar English hornbeam tree. Code requires that when there are 5 or more trees to be planted on a site, the number of trees and the required amount of variety is specified in code. So with the proposal of the trees, or the site is compliant with the amount of trees it needs and providing the variety of trees that it needs, and that it has provided 3 different varieties. However, 2 of those varieties are the existing trees, and then 10 of the proposed trees are only 1. So it's not necessarily code compliant in that the trees that are proposed are columnar in nature, as opposed to what code's intent is to provide that urban tree canopy and having more shade provided throughout the development instead of just having columnar trees throughout it. And then Garden City Code 84I4 speaks to a minimum of 5% of the gross site area needing to be landscaping. So with the site being 29,228 square feet, 5% of the site would equal 1,461 square feet, but those square footage calculations were not updated based off of the revision submitted on April 4th. So there's a condition drafted in the decision document to just clarify that and make sure it is code compliant at the point of construction. And then last note would be that, again, it is conditioned in the decision document, but there are some tree deficiencies as far as tree frontage area goes. There is a deficiency of 1 class 2 frontage tree on East 49th Street, even though there are technically 2 trees provided there. Both of those existing trees provided there are only class 1, so there is a code requirement for a 1 class 2 street tree on 49th Street. And with that, I stand for questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Veal?
I do have a question. Can you hear me?
We can.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I'm not finding in my packet here that we have elevations of both of the structures. Am I missing something, or do we? Maybe I'm not.
Yeah, I didn't
looking at
find
the
it
right-
either. The resubmittal 418 doc just has plan, right?
Let's see.
Yeah, and then I look at the.
The 4.2 has 2 elevations, and actually that was going to be my question too, is to make sure that those were the latest that were provided.
I'm looking at the 4.4 document, resubmittals document, and it only has elevations of the 3-unit building.
Nothing has changed with the other units.
It's
We
got 4
resubmitted-
units.
Yeah, it still has 4 units. We needed to resubmit the elevation on the west because we took one of the buildings out. The other one remains the same and hasn't changed.
Oh, so there was, okay.
I didn't see any reason to resubmit something that's already been, established, that we're keeping that 4 units there. No elevation change has been made. Street access is still the same. The only changes we made were with the 3 when we eliminated the 1 unit to accommodate the parking and the open space.
So the left, it's called the left side elevation, is the street facing elevation. And that is, when we're looking at this project, the left side elevation on the left is a mirror image of the one on the other side of the street, correct?
Yes.
All right. Any more questions for staff? If not, is there anybody in the audience that wishes to testify on this matter? Seems that there are none here in person. Is there anybody on Zoom that wishes to testify on this matter? Not seeing anyone raise their hand or speak up. So with that, this would go back to Mr. Kolchak for any rebuttal, should he wish to provide any.
I'm totally in agreement with Ms. Veal on the trees. Initially, it was recommended that we have columnar trees. And we can do something different in the back as far as the type of tree, as far as the species. I'm totally good with changing whatever we need to do. And I talked with Frank, the owner of the building that's existing right now, and he's totally down with us putting another tree in over there anyway. So as far as the trees goes, that's a no-brainer, done deal.
Thank you.
I think we've tried to comply with everything that the staff has recommended. And I think this kind of is a happy medium to everyone's desire to have this a workable project, and we're ready to kick off and get started. One of the things that I noticed in the staff report was that there wasn't an established timeline of completion, and I said gave a 2-year time frame. Had we been given the approval from the get-go, would have been done by now. So we're ready to hit the ground running. The 2-year time frame is a moot point.
Great, thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Kolchak? All right, seeing none, I'll close the public portion of the hearing and turn it over to the committee for discussion.
For me, I think there's 3 primary items, I guess I wanted to discuss and hear what you guys thought. The first one is the trash bin collection. I don't think I had much of an opinion on this, but going through the staff report and seeing the response from, I think it's Allied Waste, I'm not sure who, it seems even their preference would be to go on site. So I didn't know, Brett, Derek, what you guys thought about that.
Hey, well, my thought would be the same, that ideally to have that collected on site, but then you look at some of the images that were shown there where collected on the street along Aldworth is what a lot of those residences are doing.
Yeah, it does
So-
conflict with potentially with bicycle travel. And you know, that's my issue. Of course, that's only once a week.
Yeah, I think, just watching it get collected in front of my office on a weekly basis, it is, it's a big, scary, loud truck, and it would disrupt any pedestrian or bicycle traffic. It does disrupt pedestrian and bicycle traffic, even picking up the 2 toters in front of my place. So, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, how many ever more, 14 more toters out on that street. It's just, if there's an opportunity to, if there's an opportunity to minimize that impact as Garden City develops and grows, I think it should be taken. And have that pickup be on site somehow. And then it's impacting the development. It's not impacting the city at large and the people that are using the sidewalk and or bike lane.
Well, as currently designed, they're not going to be able to do that.
No. That significantly alters what can happen with this parcel and this design anyways.
All
So I
right.
guess in addition to that, the parking is the other one that I think we probably need to talk about.
So deficient in 2 guest parking and then deficient in 7.
8, or no, wait, yeah, it'd be 7. Basically twice as what's there. And
Yeah.
I think that you can easily make the case that when you have sufficient parking, garage parking for the number of bedrooms that you have, and you have driveway parking, which can facilitate guest parking, which exceeds the amount of guest parking that's required, because it could be utilized that way, then you can make the case for maybe a little bit of a trade-off there. But to eliminate guest parking, eliminate half of the required covered parking, and in a location where you don't have any on-street parking.
And where you're doing 3 bedrooms and your design
Yes.
is hurting bicycle and pedestrian
I think,
transportation.
yeah, I think this works if these are all 1-bedroom units, but that's not what we're looking at. So I've got some concerns about the lack of parking.
Yeah, I could find my way around some of that parking, but not with 3 bedrooms and not with disrupting bicycle and pedestrian transportation on the street.
I'm agreeing with that sentiment.
Okay. And it sounded like there was at least a third point of discussion.
I was going to bring up the front elevation. It has the door. It has some windows. But to me, it looks like the side of a house rather than full orientation onto the street. But I was going to see what you guys thought of that.
I would agree. I mean, it's a side elevation with a small gabled entry on the corner. And it really doesn't, the building in its massing and articulation does not, in my opinion, do enough to address the street frontage.
I agree. It's a token door, not an architectural solution to engage with the street. Which is what we're looking for.
I also think, the strength of the pedestrian connection to the other units to the street and how that is entering the other units. It looks like to me that access to the other units is up the driveway. I don't know, it just is not clear, and maybe because we don't have an updated landscape plan that really addresses that connectivity, that I just don't. I'm not sure that the entries to all of the inward units have a strong enough connection to a pedestrian route out to the street.
Yeah, I can see maybe where that intention is, because there's a little kind of lawn island on the site plan where you might come off the sidewalk and walk basically along the garage faces of the house, in between this lawn island. So I can see what that intention is. I think it just needs to be more clear with that being delineated as some sort of, textured or colored concrete or something. And I think I can kind of see and feel Craig's frustration in this, but I don't think that any of these three main points that we're talking about were something, it's not new information. I think it's stuff we talked about in the pre-app and then in the follow-up app, and we're talking about again now. So, it shouldn't come as a surprise, but I'm certain that it's coming with some frustration.
All right. By the tone of the committee, it's sounding like perhaps you may make a recommendation in denial based on the points that you brought up in discussion. If that is the direction that you are headed, if you wouldn't mind making sure that you've looked through the findings to see that they meet the criteria, we can certainly always bring back this in 2 weeks to make sure that we've gotten the findings correct. I did notice that there are discussions related to the trash and parking and findings in denial. However, I glancing through it did not see the front elevation nor the pedestrian connection.
And is that the direction at this point that staff would recommend, or that the applicant's looking for is a denial, or does he want to come back with it reworked with some of the suggestions?
Mr. Kolchak, would you prefer, if the committee is going in the direction of a recommendation for denial, to move forward and towards the council hearing, or would you like to come back and address these items that were brought up? And you're on mute, by the way.
Unmute. That means not muted. Okay. I'd like to talk to my client, see what he wants to do. We're scheduled for a Pnc hearing on Wednesday. Taking that's out of the loop. We've had 3 design review hearings, and we've made changes on each one of these. The last one, there were additional changes recommended that weren't recommended on the first one. And you guys can understand my frustration a little bit. But yeah, I need to talk to my client and see what he wants to do. And then I'll get back with you guys tomorrow. Hanna, I'll get back with you tomorrow and see what we want to do. If you guys want to deny it, then, we can move forward with the city council hearing, I guess. And that's on the 7th. Hanna?
Do we know when that's scheduled for city council? I think maybe May 9th.
9th, I think.
9th.
I believe it's May 9th.
Yeah, 9th. Saturday's the 7th. So yeah.
With that information, I believe the applicant is requesting to be continued to a date certain of May 2nd.
Sure.
Do you need us to make a motion, Jenna, on that?
That would be great. Thank you.
So moved.
Second.
Thanks.
All in
Jenna.
favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We'll see you back on the 2nd.
Hey. All right, you guys. I'll talk to you later.
Thanks, Craig.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Then the next item is also a public hearing. It is for a code amendment to 84HI5, the flood hazard provisions. This committee does look at anything that might have any code revisions that may have design implications. I personally don't believe that this particular item has design implications. There's 3 changes that are proposed. In 2020, the city adopted the state's model ordinance. Within that model ordinance, the city chose to adopt a 2-foot freeboard, or how high above the base flood elevation that the first floor needs to be built. During a recent audit, the community rating, insurance rating arm of FEMA indicated that they felt that there was some room for interpretation in code with regards to the freeboard requirement in both mechanical application and mobile home manufactured home application. And so they proposed some language just to tighten that up a little bit. So the intent is not to change the regulation, but remove any room for interpretation. And then the third change that is proposed is FEMA allows for non-substantial changes to be built to, if the structure was legally built at the time it was built, for those non-substantial changes to.
I think we just lost. I can't hear anything.
Jenna, we can't hear you out here.
Right now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Did you hear any part of the third change?
You got just a portion of it and then you got cut off.
Thank you. I'll start over there. So the third change is FEMA guidance allows for structures that were built to the standards that were in place. If there are minor alterations, that those can meet so the same standard as that structure. So as long as it's not below base flood elevation. The way that Garden City's code is written is that nothing after 1980 can meet those. If there's minor alterations that come in and the structure was built after 1980, then they're required to meet that 2 foot of freeboard. So you may have just minor changes that need to be elevated 2 to 3 feet right now. And it was just the way that it's worded. I think the intent was always that if something was built legally, that minor alterations could be built to the same standard. However, what's considered a substantial alteration or 50% alteration would still need to meet the current standards. And so that's a synopsis of the proposed changes. Any questions that I can answer?
Is there any verbiage in there anywhere that talks about that 1980, or is that just a kind of a city understanding?
Thank you, committee member Hurd. There is language and there's not a proposal to change that particular language. It's in the definitions of post firm. And so the changes that were identified, going to pull up either the ordinance or the staff report, but it really addresses the substantial alteration language instead of addressing the definition.
Yeah,
Got it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Basically saying I shot this space to Brian, but please be sure to copy on it. I don't have any concerns or comments with how the this draft document for recommendation of approval is written. So I would be okay with moving forward with a motion to approve that.
Second.
And before we do that, I just want to verify that there's no member of the public that wishes to.
Oh, sorry.
testify on this matter.
Sorry.
And I don't see any. So I think we can close the public hearing portion and move to those motions.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you very much. And that'll take us into the pre-application discussions. The first pre-application discussion is for a proposed subdivision located at 8373 West Chenen Boulevard. And Nicolette Womack is here representing that application. Yeah.
I don't know, I mean, maybe what we do is you see how the steps are now, if you were to dogleg down again to the northwest.
It's really confusing.
and then take a look at the extent of that 9 feet. Start there and then just go 3 feet. Just widen it out, I mean, lengthen the stair.
Let me just screen share it. Yeah, and then if you want to transition between PDFs, you're gonna have to exit out of the. Okay, it should be just this one. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Nicolette Womack from Kimley Horn. We're at 1100 West Idaho Street, Suite 210 in Boise, Idaho, 83702. Thanks for having us tonight or today. So nice to have a hearing or meeting during the day. So before you is a proposal at 8373 West Chenen Boulevard. We are working in collaboration with Cole Architects, and then the developers are here tonight as well. As you can see here, this is the original site plan which was submitted within the application. You'll see on the following slides, we're working through some more layouts as well as we're receiving feedback along the way. And so we just wanted to get before you all early to see your initial feedback. We still need to go to the Planning and Zoning Commission as well. So we've come here pretty early for you guys, just to make sure we're working in alignment with the design review guidelines. So as you can see here, we're at 82 townhomes. There are 2-car garages within each unit, and then there's additional guest parking. There's currently an access proposed on Chenen and one on Coffee Street. And then there is the Thurman Drain Canal on the rear. This is made up of a variety of random tax parcels, basically. Here we just have a clarification on which parcels are included at the moment. We did receive detailed staff comments and we appreciate all of those and are working to address them. So you'll see that in the revised slides to come. There were discussions about a Chenen pathway and we continue to work with ITD on their feedback about if that pathway will be in the right of way or on site. We recognize that there's a need for detached sidewalk on Coffee Street and additional modulation, glazing and fenestration. And I'll be turning it over to the architect to talk about that with the slides. Then we also recognize the discussion on covered entry of some kind, parking dimensions, the ADA guest and bicycle parking, also the private street widths. We are planning to widen those. We plan to provide the sustainability information you requested and a tree mitigation plan has been done. We are just getting that all drawn up at this point. The inventory has been done and we plan to be compliant with that. A lot of what's along the canal will remain. And we understand there's a 10% common open space requirement, so we plan to be compliant with that. And then on Thurman Drain, there's some discussion back and forth. We don't necessarily have a preference at the moment on if the city would prefer that it be remain open, and the canal company is actually preferring that it would be closed. So we're just remaining informed throughout that process. So currently on the plan that you initially received, there was 47% open space included, and portions of that include the canal areas. So of course, if that were open or tiled, that would probably play into our open space calculation as well. And then this is our most current revised plans at the moment. So we've
placed a building along Coffee Street to address that street frontage. And then we've created a little bit more frontage along the canal just to have a little more garden style units on that side. And then we've also mixed up the unit types to provide different blocking massings on Chenen. And with that, I will turn the time over to Iman. He's on there. I don't know if he needs unmuted.
Actually, this is Ian. I'm gonna speak in Eamon's place. Just he's in the background, so he'll pipe up. But we appreciate Ian Hoffman, 720 West Ada Street, Boise, Idaho, 83702. So thank you so much for having us today. Looking through the staff report, I think we were, as Nicolette had mentioned, we were very early on in this process, and so still working with the owner on refining these floor plans so that we can meet the intent of Garden City. Our objective is to have 3 distinct different types of floor plans throughout this. We're currently showing 3 different floor units throughout the 6-plex option. Since we've last spoke, the owner is looking at the additional of a 3-story unit versus the 2-story unit that was additionally submitted. And so that is what we're looking at as counting towards our 3rd amenity option. So trying to differentiate these 3 enough so that they can be classified as 3 different floor plans. And so we're fairly confident that we will meet that desire through different unit kind of makeup, bed count, and then design aesthetic from the exterior as well. The end units are all 22 feet wide, while all the interior units are 20 feet wide on center. So overall, unit makeup is intended to be differentiated throughout the entire development. The hope with this development is that we are creating a very pedestrian and street friendly mix of buildings. I think some of the early on concepts were a little, I would say, not completely fleshed out, as your staff report kind of shows. We were looking at more of a contemporary feel, and now we're kind of stepping back a little bit to kind of address a little bit more feel that feels a little bit more like Garden City, based on kind of the direction that us and the client have started to work through. So with that, all of these all of these floor plans you've seen, there are makeup of 6-plex units, 4-plex units, and then in the back we talked about the addition of a 3-story unit. So a variety of different kinds of make and model throughout this entire development. If you keep going, Nicolette, yeah, again, just these are what we originally had, and I think we had some updated floor plans just to kind of show the progression of what we've been able to amend since we've last spoke. So I'll keep going. Next slide. And again, this is what we had originally submitted, and kind of looking at a more contemporary approach with some unique kind of materials. Some of the comments, this design style didn't really jive with the comments that we received. So we've since then kind of gone back and relooked at that and started to rework with. We've got some working drawings in this presentation that we can share with you. If you keep going, it's the first colored one, Nicolette. So I won't bore you with stuff you've already seen and commented on, and your comments are well received. The current layout that we're kind of going with is trying to show modularity between each of these kind of units so that they have their own distinct look, using more kind of earth tone and some brighter colors to differentiate between unit makeups. We're also planning on having each of the units, which depending on where it is, maybe rotate in orientation a little bit so that as you're looking down Chenen, the intent is so that you don't see this repetitious, monotonous kind of row of townhomes. They all have kind of a little bit of a different look, but also have a very good homogeny of being a singular kind of entity throughout the site. So trying to create an identity throughout the site, but also not something that is repetitive and overbearing to Chenen Boulevard. The intent is to look at these as more garden style, a lot of landscaping, very walkable, promoting that area and trying to revitalize and upbring that area as a gateway to Chenen so that we can really start down the good path and working with ITD, as Nicola had mentioned, and trying to incorporate some of Garden City's bike and pedestrian requirements that we're seeing more in the core of the city, trying to bring those out to this more of the outskirt area and really start down a path. So this is kind of a nice anchor project for the city as we move forward. We currently are looking at the ability to either have balconies or Juliet style window balconies throughout the face. Still working with the owner on that. So any feedback on that would be wonderful. The images before you is very planar currently. The intent would be that there is a lot of modulation throughout this without being too overbearing, but we would continue to work through having covered overhangs. The entries that we're seeing are primarily glass, so you can get a lot of light in. These are relatively small units, so we want to have incorporate as much glass as possible with having some privacy. We do anticipate, based on the topography, that these units might be set off of the street, just elevated slightly. I think because of some different site conditions, we are looking at maybe a 1 or 2 step up from Chenen. And so having the ability to kind of have these stoops in front and then sidewalks and pathways up into each of the buildings so they have a real frontage to the street is important to us. And then I think if we keep going, there might be a couple of precedents that show a little bit. Some of the earlier precedents that we've shown on the far right and the bottom one kind of lend themselves to be a little bit maybe too contemporary for what, based on the comments that we see. Not that you all were against that, it's just between cost and kind of really maybe overextending. We're kind of leaning more towards a precedent on the top left. And then since then, we've started to incorporate actually a little bit more earth tones and tone down the color palette a little bit, just to kind of have a little bit more sense of Idaho and blend, incorporating things like overhangs to allow for shadow, more larger overhangs for the porches and things like that. So that's the direction we're heading, and we'd love to hear more comments and really appreciate your time in the staff report.
Thank you. And as this is a pre-application meeting, it's an informal discussion between you, the applicant, and the committee, and I'll turn it over for that discussion.
So I have a question. I thought I heard you say that you're looking potentially at some 3 stories, but that would be in the back of the development. Is there any reason, and maybe I heard wrong, but is there any reason that you would not consider putting those along Chenen?
We had talked to the owner at some point. We haven't dialed that in. The reason we were looking at potentially pulling in more towards the back is so that we have a little bit more of a layering when it comes to how we approach Chenen. The intent being that this is probably one of the more residential kind of style units along Chenen in this area. And having that 3-story unit butt up against Chenen, we felt would be have a negative effect in 2 ways. And we could be wrong, because my initial thought was to have the 3-story units right on Chenen. The first being is that since we're more on the outline of the the street face and a little bit more out towards the end of Chenen Boulevard, I guess, if you could say that, next to you all, there's not a lot of density out there currently. I know that we're trying to kind of spark and do some of those good urban development requirements, but we want to be cognizant of our surroundings. And since there weren't a lot of 3-story or 4-story or even 2-story buildings, we felt that the scale would be a little imposing to Chenen, as well as to encourage pedestrian growth right on Chenen. And this is just, internal opinions. Your opinion could differ completely. So that was our one thought. Another thought was that as a development and PUD in general, is that we really wanted this to feel like a very open and kind of inviting area. And so trying to layer back from Chenen as opposed to kind of create a huge wall at Chenen allowed us, in our mind, to kind of have some visual views from the street up to, and we're facing that dark vegetated area is a pretty steep road. We didn't want the buildings towards the back to feel like they were in kind of a canyon. So having the 3 stories towards the back, being able to look out, they would have the views over the tops of those units out front, to kind of the foothills and things like that, is kind of how we were treating that, as opposed to maybe a view directly into your neighbor's back bedroom. And so that was the intent with that approach, and just trying to have that kind of layer, as well as starting this kind of Chenen Boulevard and Gateway off on kind of more gradual scope before you get closer to downtown, as opposed to having this big entity right there. Does that make sense? Or
I do understand what you're saying. I still would encourage you to look at again, potentially. Not that every unit on Chenen needs to be 3 stories, but even having some 3 stories, some 2-story, you get a lot of variety just with that alone. Instead of that long line of all buildings the exact same height. So that's one reason why I would suggest looking at that. The other is Chenen is so wide that the taller your buildings are, the less wide Chenen feels, and that can actually help encourage bicycle and pedestrian appeal for people. So and I'm interested in what Derek and Brett have to say about that, but I would suggest looking at that.
okay.
Yeah, I think that's a good exploration, Maureen, and I've never discouraged things from being tall. So I'd like to see what that looks like too. And a couple times, Ian, you mentioned about, the original presentation and kind of like concept images were contemporary. And then you said something to the effect like you're bringing it back down a little bit now for more of a Garden City feel. And you mentioned that you're getting comments and feedbacks, and it almost sounded like they were coming from this being reviewed already or from staff. And I was just wondering where those were coming from and that direction.
Yes. So we had an initial staff report based on the presentation that we had sent. I don't know if Derek, you were one of the people.
I may have been absent or something.
Oh, okay. But just commenting on kind of city requirements, and we
No,
really
I'm seeing a couple of head shakes like we haven't seen.
Yeah, we haven't
Okay.
seen this
Okay.
before.
Okay.
It's just the staff report, and
Okay.
Gotcha.
maybe just some of the items that came up, like you need to have a covered entry, and just different
okay.
items like that. Maybe gave you the idea that you needed to push in a completely different aesthetic, as far as less contemporary, more traditional, or what have you. And I guess I would agree that that's really not a requirement. It's just those components need to be incorporated into the design. If you want to take a more contemporary approach to it, I think there's plenty of ways that you can incorporate the items that that we're looking for and need to see in the treatments in a contemporary fashion.
Yep.
Yeah. And that was that. Go
Okay.
ahead.
No, and I didn't want to cut you off. I apologize, and I think I may have overstepped using that word, but my apologies. I thought you had seen it, but and I think from the contemporary side, we've been kind of pushing this through and working with our client a little bit more, and so trying to find that right balance of what makes sense. But yes, and I probably leaned on.
Yeah. I hear you. And
but yes,
and I just as a broad brush too, because it's an informal kind of conversation, is I think some of the projects that we've got the most excited about, and I think then are the most successful, have been leaning more contemporary, and that's that's subjective in my opinion. But I want to erase the maybe discouragement for contemporary that you've wherever that came from, and don't be shy.
That's great. We've got more projects in Garden City that we'd love to, but and so what we're trying to do, and again, these we're still early, is get a good sense of feedback, and this is great stuff from you all, so that we can take that back to the clients are present there currently, so they're probably shaking their head at me right now, but this is wonderful, so I do appreciate the feedback.
I would also echo the comment with regards to variety of 2-story and 3-story along the street frontage. You have a unique opportunity here in that you don't have surrounding uses that are impacted by the height where you need to push the buildings back and kind of and come with lower lying, maybe 2-story as it approaches different uses or different adjacent uses. So to create that kind of excitement and the massing, variety and massing of the individual 4-plexes, 5-plexes, whatever you've got going on along that street frontage, I think just makes for a better overall street presence that this has.
And I know that we're early on, and unfortunately I couldn't see or haven't had a chance to, wasn't able to review the last person's design. And so I'd like to maybe go back if that's part of the city record and look, because I do want to address your comments and making sure that we're not making something that looks like the side of a house or too busy. I guess my question to the committee would be in regards to the 2-story and 3-story on Chenen. We've had clients in the past that can't make 3 stories pencil out. And I know that that's not your concern, but is there a happy medium where if 3 stories are not equitable or able to be worked into a pro forma for our client, we want to make sure that they maybe are able to be worked into somewhere else or maybe not at all. Is that something, the condition of denial, that if we don't have that variety of 2 and 3-story, but have a variety of different floor plans that meet the requirement of 3 different floor plans, so that we have that variety, is that something that you would all consider? It's hypothetical, but just kind of gauging the thought on that, if that makes sense.
I'm not sure I completely understand, but there's not a requirement for you to have 3 stories.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If that
Yes.
kind of
And
answers
that's,
your question.
and I know that trying to create that gateway and corridor at Chenen with 3 stories is something that you've all mentioned, and we would love to kind of consider looking at that. I'm just, I didn't know if approval is contingent on that, other than just making sure that there is enough variety in your eyes.
I think it's your comment about, considering the 3-story options and then talking about how the placement of those is what kind of sparked that,
Okay.
those comments is that don't feel that it's necessary to place, if you do have 3-story options, that it's necessary to put them at the back of the site. Okay. Along the drainage canal.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
All right, and members of the committee, Ian, this is Hannah. I just wanted to clarify that this will be a subdivision to be processed as a planned unit development. So there is going to be some kind of variety required in the dwelling units, and usually that is with the floor plans. I've talked with the applicant multiple times about it, so they are aware. I just wanted to make sure that that was added to the record in discussion today.
And that by nature, Ian, extrapolates into bedroom counts, right?
Yes,
a different floor
definitely.
plan is a different bedroom count.
Yes, yeah, so that's how
Okay.
we've processed it typically. So studios, 2 bedrooms, 10 bedrooms, cottage living, something along those lines.
And if I
So-
might add, go ahead.
Well, I think you're going to say it, Jenna. Go ahead.
Well, I have 2 points on that. The application that I think probably did the best job in varying their floor plans to meet that, really did think through about the different users. So you may have accessible master bedrooms on the bottom floor. You may think through where you might have roommate situations and have dual masters, or families where all the bedrooms are centered around each other. And then the second, I think the committee probably can articulate it better than I can, because they have said it a number of times, but the individual units architecturally also would need to be varied. And so it's, I think Derek probably said it this way, or committee member Hurd that what makes somebody know that that unit is specifically theirs? If you're telling somebody what distinguishes it.
Understood. Yep.
And,
Thank
and
you.
something too, just to consider is, with the popularity of ADUs in essence, and we may think of an ADU as, a little granny flat behind a house in the north end or something like that, because that's where most of them are right now. But there's nothing to say that, 3 of building 3's units could have a studio ADU in essence on the main floor, and then 2 floors of a 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, 2-bath above it, right? So an individual townhouse, potentially, this is your design challenge, could be made up of, an individual studio and a larger unit on top of it, or vice versa. It's just a way to maybe mix things up and a way to maybe make a 3-story pencil out.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for that feedback. Any other initial comments that, from our standpoint, we just really wanted to hear it straight from you all, and your comments have been wonderful. So I appreciate that. We are looking, I apologize.
I was just going to say one more thing, and you guys seem to be already thinking on this line, is that how important the pedestrian connectivity in and about and out to the street, and bicycle connectivity, any of that kind of stuff on a size of development like this is going to be important that we'll be looking at.
Yes, and this site plan that we're seeing on the screen currently doesn't have all the walkways, but we do anticipate all the required bike parking, guest parking, and then trying to create little pockets of public and semi-private public area that's more kind of catered. It's a public area, anybody can walk through it, but it's a little more catered towards maybe the residents. So trying to create these little nodes and pathways and things like that create some visual interest for pedestrians walking through. And again, building 11, the one on Coffee Street, originally was not facing Coffee Street. That was one thing that we felt was important, to have that public connection to Coffee, even though there's currently no sidewalk on there and it's facing the U-Haul. It's not always going to look like that. And so we want to make sure that we're starting off on the right foot.
And along the lines of the open space, Garden City's comp plan prefers to leave waterways open. However, there are state statutes to deal with. So I guess that's basically that comment. But if either way, I'd be interested in really seeing how you utilize your open space. And it may be there already. And then I also, when I reviewed this, just have a thank you. Garden City's comp plan also requests trees, and the code requirements are class 2 or 3. And I noted that you have at least some class 3 trees on your site plan, and it seems like we don't tend to get too many of the larger trees. So just to thank you for adding big trees.
Trying to maintain as many of those nice trees out there as possible. It's difficult, but we want to. Well, Nicolette, I'll turn it back over to you unless any of the other committee members have any comments, but I do appreciate everybody's time. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. And we look forward to, one last thing, just to note. The committee members did receive the email from ITED, but not your response yet. Okay. We'll make sure to get that in the record.
Yep.
Thank you. And with that, Nicolette can just hang out right where she is. The next pre-application discussion is for design review fiscal year 2022, number 8. A new construction of a commercial building for an equipment rental business located at 4665 West Chenen Boulevard.
Thank you. And Nicolette Womack with Kimley Horn again, 1100 West Idaho Street, Suite 210, Boise, Idaho. I'm going to share my screen again. All right, so before you today, in this pre-application discussion, there's a project for equipment share at 4665 Chenen Boulevard. So shown here is a vicinity map of the area, and I'm sure you have all seen it on Chenen driving by. So they are currently in stage 1 of the permit. So they finished the CUP and they're working to resolve the conditions that came up for phase 1. So a lot of what you see is relatively similar to this existing image. There's 3 access points, 2 on Chenen right now, 1 on 47th Street. And then in the CUP, there was a condition that 1 access be removed on Chenen and this access be shifted to align with Goodall. Phase 2 is when a full building is constructed and the site is brought up to all the remaining conditions of the conditional use permit. So again, on this one, we submitted an initial proposal. We received the staff report and did our best to address as many comments as possible and are looking for additional direction on some of the more vague comments in the report. So I might just flip through this one and get to our latest version. This was the landscaping plan you all saw and the existing, the current proposed elevations. We sent this via email, so I'm not sure if it got in the record officially, but we'll show you the latest plans. But the main things that came up were a discussion about possibly removing all Chenen access. There was discussion about maximum front building setback of 15 feet. There was discussion about the elevations needing additional visibility, facade and roofline articulation, landscaping updates, straight loading spaces, painted parking lot pathways, and then the typical sustainable development provisions. We need 18 points. So the site plan was revised to address several of those things. So the proposed access on Chenen was actually shifted to the east, and that was because we were working to address the feedback about wanting the building to be closer to the road. And to do that, we needed to shift the circulation of where this equipment comes through the site. So we were able to skinny up parts of the service drive by about 20 feet if we were able to shift the main equipment entrance on the east side and then have vehicular customer parking on the west side. And then through discussions with the client equipment share, we noted that the existing building, they actually desired to have it remain, not the main building in the front, but the building in the rear. And then there was a need for a fuel island on the site. So we have a slide we can show you if you want to see that in more detail, but it's actually behind the building. So you won't see a lot of it from the street frontage. And then we heard the feedback about pedestrian access off of to the west, I guess west-ish, the left of this plan, because it's all kind of skewed. And most of the site is gravel. And so we were having a hard time figuring out how we'd paint the gravel to get to the main building. And so we felt like it made sense maybe to have a sign or something that tells customers that this is only for equipment and that they need to walk north and come through the site. Unique to this exact use, we don't see a lot of people walking to pick up this kind of large scale equipment. They usually are bringing a truck or something of some kind that's going to have a trailer or something to load that equipment on. So it's a little different for this use, but we understand the feedback. There was also a need for a loading zone. So we have added that right here. And then with fencing initially, there was wrought iron fencing the whole way around. And then as we're working through the landscaping feedback and whatnot, we were discussing the budget and found that it would be better to have a different style fencing on the fencing treatment on the south side. So we can walk you through that. The architect is here as well, so I can turn the time over to her if she wants to walk through the elevations.
Good afternoon. My name is Amy Miles. I'm with PB2 Architecture and Engineering, 2809 Ajax Avenue, Rogers, Arkansas, 72758. So what you see in front of you are some revised elevations. We originally came into you for design review with some reduced glazing on the 47th Street side. So that is the long side of the building. So right here, we've added glazing in. This is the proposed showroom area. So there's been glazing adding here. And we have discussed adding additional glazing above these overhead doors, but would like to maybe have some additional conversations about that, in that this is, like Nicolette said, this is a heavy equipment, machinery site. There's large scale equipment moving around all the time. The potential for damage to that glass and or just, you know, dirt and grime and materials from the shop area could make that slightly more unsightly than I think city staff and planning is looking for. So this is the current proposal. I think this is just about 10% glazing on this 47th Street side. And I know that the requirement is 15. So if there's any flexibility that we have for that, that would be appreciated. So there's additional conversation to be had there, I think. In addition to that, I believe that one of the comments was roofline articulation also on this 47th Street side. Again, something that we would like to discuss with staff if possible. This is actually going to be the second in a national fleet of equipment share buildings. This will be the second build that we have. And the goal going forward for the client is uniformity. They want as much as possible. And so these premium metal buildings are what we've decided to go forward with. And as you can see, it's kind of hard to tell in this rendering, but the roof line on the front side of the building facing Chenen is actually pitched. So this is the low side of the building and this is the high side. So again, conversations about the roof line articulation, because this is a flat standing seam roof. So articulating that would be questionable. I mean, the ideas that we have, it's very hard to kind of envision how we articulate that and still keep this in the design frame that the client is looking for. So just additional conversations with that. If we could possibly change materials on the front of the building in this light gray area, maybe add some Nichiha fiber cement paneling that has a wood grain to it. So it looks, you know, slightly more upscale, or something, adding a wainscot somewhere on this side of the building or on the front of the building to enhance the overall look while still keeping with the vision that the client has for their whole national fleet. So those are the really only two architectural comments that we had. And again, we are open to discussion with staff and anyone who would like to provide input.
I think maybe one suggestion would be to look at those different uses. You've got the service area use and you've got the showroom area component, and maybe a difference in roof height between those two to kind of articulate those masses would be potentially a way to achieve that. And probably I don't know which one's driving the other one.
Sure.
But
there is what you can't see in this, and I'm not sure that you have a floor plan, but what you can't see in this is there is a mezzanine in this shop area. So right here, there's actually a second floor. Oh, sweet. Thank you. So this is so here is the 47th Street side. This is the added glazing, and this is a shop parts mezzanine area that's a second floor in the shop area. Again, not saying that that's not a valid option. I actually think it's a really good idea, but it's just going to be some design implications that we'll have to take into account with the showroom area versus the shop area. But thank you.
Yeah, I just, maybe it's where at what is that, grid line 6, maybe that's where that transition
Yes.
occurs, or something like that, to provide some variation. Right now, there's it's all one plane vertically with very little, there's a little bit there at the entryway where it kind of pulls in, but then outside of that, it's one flat roof plane, like you can see there in the second drawing down. And I think to comply with code, some articulation in that to break up that line is going to be necessary.
Okay, we'll certainly take that back and work on modifying design to incorporate that.
Yeah, I agree with you, Brett. And I think this big block industrial prefab metal building is exactly why a lot of things are written into the code so that we see, some of that roof line breakup. We see, a certain amount of glazing. We see a certain amount of character in a building, that kind of makes the city what it is. And
Sure.
So I think a lot of those things, we can't say, oh, because it's got this use or that use, it doesn't need to meet this part of code. It's kind of, they're in there to make the city as a whole what it is. So I think we'll be looking for a lot of those things that will be and have been written up in the staff report.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
I have a question for staff. I'm assuming that this has come in front of the design review committee on a meeting I wasn't at? Or is this the first time we're seeing
Nope.
it?
This is the first time.
Okay, so on the website, I was trying to download their resubmittal, and it looks like it's downloading a second copy of the staff report. So if you could check that and make sure that those documents are correct, and it just could be that, who knows with technology, maybe my cookies are barring me from downloading it. I don't know. The other thing is, this was a conditional use, correct? I'm assuming?
Yep. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so it's a conditional use for a reason, especially when you look at this area, how it's supposed to be, Chenen is supposed to be that green boulevard or green corridor. This is a mixed use activity center. Not typically going to see an equipment sales type place there. However, what's really cool about Garden City is that we do mix all of these different uses. And we're able to do that successfully by not designing it to be an equipment sales place, but designing it to fit into the character of where you're locating it. So, again, I would point to the staff report and just making sure that you're complying with all of the requirements.
Yeah, can we pull up the site plan again? Just had a comment on that, and that's the revised site plan. I guess I'm just wondering, what I would like to see is to get away from having vehicular traffic in front of the building. Let the building come forward to the street and have a real identity and presence at the street. And potentially a way to maybe accommodate that would be to even flop your drive to the other side of the building and maybe have your access out on the 47th be that other access where you're bringing the heavy equipment and the rest of that, and the access off of Chenen is just to access the parking. and not trying to have this kind of dual where you're coming in on one side and you need to get over to the other side from that access point. I would just recommend that you maybe look at some different options of how you can get the front of the building up closer to the street and eliminate the need for cross vehicular traffic in front of the building, if possible.
I completely agree. And one other, this is, I did go through the staff report and maybe I missed this. I don't think that meets the minimum street frontage required, like the percentage of the building that has to be within a certain area of the street. It looks like a very narrow building with a very wide lot. Is there potentially a way to
I don't see
move the
that.
building clockwise half a turn?
Yeah, so I just want to provide some feedback on that. So we worked through a few different versions, and the reason why we went with this orientation was it got the showroom area closer to the Chenen frontage, but also these sides are straight through shot garage bays, and we know part of your code too talks about not wanting it on the main street frontage. So if we went clockwise, we would just need to work out how the garage bays front Chenen.
Was there any comments from the transportation authorities on the Chenen curb cut? I read through it and just refreshed my memory what those said.
Yeah, so we did go through the conditional use permit, and at that time, one Chenen access was allowed, so one was removed. And then just recently, we forwarded these comments over to Hanna to include, and they said they looked at the site a little bit more. Site plan has previously been permitted for 2 commercial approaches. This is from ITD. So the closure of one approach and moving it to a compliant spacing of more than 250 feet, as you know, is a significant step in the right direction. For generation, TIS not required. Then they go on about turn lanes and whatnot. So.
Okay. Yeah, my gut reaction on the site plan was the same as Brett and Maureen's, is to get the building to the street. And I think there's some specific verbiage in the code that talks about parking behind the building rather than in front of the building and transportation access. So I think we'll be looking for that for sure.
Okay.
Right. Any other items that the committee can identify to help the applicant go to the next step? All right.
Yeah, I don't have any additional.
Thank
I
you.
guess the only other thing I would add is we are hoping to move forward with our public hearing. We are hearing the feedback, and we intend to be responsive. So if that's possible, we're excited about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, I'll move on to, or we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is another pre-application discussion, design review fiscal year 2022, number 9. Mr. Hatch is requesting a new construction of a commercial building for a multi-tenant artist studio located at 4708 Fenton Street. Mr. Hatch?
Oh, hello. This is Steve
Hello.
Beeson with Hatch Design Architecture. And Jeff could not make it today, so I'm presenting this. We are located at 200 West 36th Street in Garden City, and we thank you for your consideration today. And I will share my screen here. Okay, and do you see that?
We don't,
You see
no.
this? Let's see here. Almost got it. How about that?
There you go.
All right, cool. Thank you. Okay, this project is located at 4708 Fenton Street. Get over to the vicinity map. It's located at the corner of East 47th and Fenton. And this is our site plan. Um, These are intended to be artisan studios. There's an existing single-family dwelling on the site. And one of the comments that came back from Ms. Veal in planning was the need for a garage for the existing dwelling. And we would probably solve that with one of the building A bays would become a garage for that dwelling. And let's see here. The buildings along on the corner of 47th and 5th and Fenton, building B, would include second floor mezzanines. I know this was another thing that came up in the city comments about having living space. We wouldn't have that as part of this permit. It was just something that could be a potential, and they would be like a separate TI permit in the future. But right now, the buildings would have accessible bathrooms. Each unit would have accessible bathrooms. And right now, we are proposing 4 spaces, parking spaces with 1 ADA space. And we propose that parking be internal, also 2 spaces each internal to each unit. This is the landscape plan. And one thing that also came up was the need for a detached sidewalk. Right now there's existing attached on 47th. And then about 90 feet northwest of the site, there's an attached sidewalk. And we weren't able to get that updated prior to this hearing, but we could accommodate that in this site. And this is our proposed elevations. This is metal sidings using color and horizontal and vertical orientation to differentiate the units. Glazing is on the 2nd floor where the mezzanines are. The owner did not want glazing on the 1st floor facade. We would propose landscaping, possible trellises as some sort of alternate compliance on that. This is the building A garage that would be behind the existing dwelling unit. And let's see here. And that's basically the presentation at the moment. We just look forward to hearing your comments. This is our initial submittal here, and we just look forward to hearing some comments. And I'll turn that back over to you guys.
Well, I guess I'll start with my first comment, which is the comment that is there with every single project, is how this building addresses the street frontage, and it has 2 street frontages to address. And so, I'm going to be looking for some significant treatment of some kind at the pedestrian level along the street. If we don't have any fenestrations down there, I don't know. I guess I'm a little concerned with this large, kind of industrial building with a single man door as its sole addressing the street in that fashion.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know if it's possible without fenestration. It's architecture and fenestration.
This is true. Would like using an accent material of some sort, or maybe even like architectural cladding, like metal cladding to mimic glazing.
I,
A mural of glazing is not glazing.
Well, not a mural of glazing. I would say like architectural panels or something that would mimic glazing.
I mean, I guess if it needs to be solid and that the client's concerned about people looking in or viewing in, you know, there's always the opportunity to do glazing with a false wall behind it, you know, something of that nature. But I just that glazing is needed at the street level.
Okay.
It can be additionally applied to the upper level, but not at the upper level and not the street level. I just don't, I wouldn't feel comfortable that meets the intent.
Okay.
And code aside, what's going on in the space that whoever's in that space wouldn't want to see the sky and the weather and trees and birds? Like, isn't it just kind of nice to whoever's in there to be able to have some connection with the outside?
Correct. The client's concerned with security.
There's plenty of ways to handle security.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean.
And I might suggest if the intent is truly for artists, my hunch is most artists would like natural light in their space.
Okay.
And there is a code provision in 8.2C. And it does state that the art and or creative process being conducted on the site, if you are an artist studio, which is what you're claiming, needs to be visible to the public and on sale at the site, and the site is open to the public.
And then in looking at it, you had indicated that any future residential would do some sort of like a TI. Just noting that the way that it's set out, if there would be an intent for residential, I recommend talking to a building official, just because I know that it can be difficult to separate areas that have exhaust. And so having that bay door and not having it separated might be tricky.
Okay. Thank you for that feedback.
Any other comments?
Yeah, would there, besides the glazing, would there be other comments on the materials?
I just made one while I was on mute, but I'll repeat it for all of you guys.
Okay, sounds good.
Just the general comments of, you know, roofline articulation and building steps and setbacks and things like that, that, you know, kind of make a building what it is rather than a, you know, prefab metal building like it looks like now.
Yeah, I agree. And then it's, you know, it is going to be important once again with the pedestrian connectivity in and throughout the site. And I see that there's some striping and such. But we'll definitely be looking at that as well.
So let's see here. So definitely more glazing on the first floor facade, I'm hearing. The articulation of the building. I believe code mentions a couple of things that I had a question about. One was that there was a 50-foot length wall. There also, what is the reference in the code? But there's also one that mentions 2.5 times the height of the building. And I just kind of wanted to get the difference on that. Or if Ms.
And-
Veal can speak to that.
Yeah, can staff bring that up? Whatever. I think that has to deal with stepping the building facade.
Mhm. I
Is
mean,
that a specific question for staff?
well, yeah, just the difference. One part of the code mentions 50 feet, the other part mentions 2.5 times the height. And I was curious as to where this applies. I believe right now our longest blank wall is 60 feet, which is 2.5 times the height.
And you're referring to the 8.4C.
Yeah, I had it written down here. Where did it go? The 8.4C 4B. I'm just looking.
It does speak to wall planes where facades should not have a wall plane wider than 2.5 times the height of the wall plane. And then there is an example within code itself, but it's essentially a provision put in the code book to require different like roof line heights, or just at least so there's not one giant long facade along a frontage anywhere. So there's some variability there on those facades.
Also, is there a trash enclosure someplace, or how is refuse waste handled?
Thank you for the comment there. We were proposing individual carts to be brought to the curb for pickup.
Yeah, again, I probably would work with Republic Services to see what their preference is.
Okay.
For collection at that particular location, and this type of a use, more of an industrial building.
Okay, we'll reach out to them.
And so just to clarify that this is, so the existing dwelling, the existing residential use there is going to remain as residential use and on the same parcel? Is that?
That is correct. The parcel would be consolidated. I don't believe they're going to parcel that off.
And
Okay.
did you say that the existing residential use is planning on parking within one of the commercial artist studios?
Correct. In building A, the one closest to, that was the solution that the owner had, was to just designate that as parking for the home.
Well, then I guess I'd just make sure that, you know, it's clearly kind of identified that connectivity between this residence's garage location and their house. You know, from an access standpoint. I mean, it looks like there's a lot of fencing there, kind of separating that use out from the others. So just, you know, take that into consideration, that we'll want to see that really there's connectivity between the two.
Okay, that sounds good. And that could be a door to the backyard, or even, would that be something you want to see in a development agreement?
Sure.
Okay, understood.
All right.
I don't have any more comments.
All I have.
Well, thank you, and we look forward to seeing you when you bring this back. And with that, we can move.
Oh, just to say thank you very much for your comments, and yes, we will work on this and bring you something to look at. That we'll take your comments into consideration. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And last but not least, the last discussion of the day is another pre-app meeting for design review fiscal year 2022, number 10. Rebecca Kent is requesting a master sign plan for a structure located at 104, 106, and 108 West 31st Street. And with that, Ms. Kent.
All right, Rebecca Kent with our Kent Architects at 8774 West Campberry Street, Boise, Idaho 83704. So I will share my screen. All right, so we're currently under building permit right now. My client likes to purchase commercial buildings and turn them around into an asset for the community. So this being within the live, work, create district, we thought it appropriate to name this the art block, and we currently have 8 pending tenants that are of different artistic backgrounds and artistic trades. So we made several improvements to the building already under permit. We are replacing the windows, adding new entrances. This concrete wall, we added a mural that it was a pretty unattractive CMU wall that's very visible from 31st Street. So we added a mural, and this building we're naming it the art block. The building is currently as 3 different parcels, so it's a pretty large facade. Let's see. And so we're requesting through a master design plan, requesting an exception for the current allowed square footage for the signage. The current square footage for this district is only 8 square feet. Which there are a lot of commercial buildings within this district, and that really doesn't account, that part of the code really doesn't account for the commercial buildings that are there currently. Because that's really, so the signage that we're requesting is actually only 1.2% of the total building facade. So we're asking for this sign that names the building right here on an architectural feature backdrop. And then this directory sign is 10.5 square feet. And the size of the letters are actually only 1.5 inches. So anything smaller than that would be really hard for a pedestrian to read. And we wanted them to understand where all the tenants were located within the building. So the total sign square footage that we're requesting is 29.25 square feet. And then this is a rendering that we submitted at the very beginning, just showing the mural and the name of the building, and then the directory will be above the mailbox. The mailbox is actually not in front of the window. It's where this lattice is right here. And the sign would be on this. So yep, that is what we're requesting, for that signage to be approved based on that.
And then before we get into discussion, I think Hannah has just a few details to note.
Yeah, so this is a master sign program. As a master sign program, that is its technical application type. It isn't required to have a public hearing, and therefore it is just a pre-application as of this point in time. But I have been able to draft a decision document in case the design review committee feels that an approval or denial is recommended or decided upon tonight, if they don't need to come back for another meeting to address any comments or concerns. But as a master sign program, the applicant, an application is able to deviate from the sign district standards. And this sign district is sign district 1. And essentially the standards that which the application is deviating from is the size of the sign standards. That's it. Thank you.
Hannah, what is the difference in the requirement versus what they're proposing? How big of a difference is it?
That detail I am not sure off the top of my head. Let me look into it real quick.
Thank you.
I could be wrong while she looks into it, so I won't give the number I think it is, but it's quite small. It's intended to be very residential in nature for sign district 1.
Rebecca, can you scroll back to the color rendering for 1 second?
Yes.
Just got to get that in my head.
And then one other thing that I
Thank you.
might note is the mural would not be part of it's not required to be a part of the sign plan, as it would be a piece of art versus a signage.
And that's not review. Murals are never reviewed as signage, or are they reviewed as signage when they are signage?
When they are signage, I guess a mural could be a sign. Then it would be reviewed under the sign plan or under the sign provisions. But if it is purely a piece of art, there's no city regulations that would require any sort of review.
And this one is, and it looks great, by the way.
Thank you.
And I came up with that the sign needs to be distinctive in nature, and it's allowed to be up to 8 square feet in size. It appears to be larger than 8 square feet in size. And then the lighting also needs to be external. And then the maximum number of signs is limited to 1 per building face.
This is in your drafted conditions?
That is the typical standards of sign district 1. So
Okay.
essentially in the drafted conditions, it's allowing the exemption of the proposed sign from those standards that I just.
Which is size. This is backlit instead of front lit, and there's 2 signs instead of 1 sign.
Yes.
So three exceptions to that. And I hear what Rebecca was saying about, it is a commercial type of feel there. So it is kind of, maybe needs some flexibility for what it is and where it is.
And can I get some clarification on the backlit? I mean, is it a solid channel letters with lighting that creates a halo effect, or is it a translucent material that is lit from behind that the whole sign characters or the letters are lit individually, they stand out, and what are we talking about there?
Yeah, so it's halo lighting. It's lit from behind.
Okay,
Yep, not translucent.
solid, yeah, solid letters that are lit
Right.
from behind in channels.
Yep.
Okay. I think the larger signage, I guess, is appropriate for the size of this building and for more of a commercial structure. And I really don't have any, I guess, issues or concerns with making an exception on the signage for this particular building.
I agree.
And I mean, I think we could probably make a decision now and not need to have it come back to us.
I think so too.
Okay, I would move to approve
Second.
presented.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Well, thank you, committee. That brings us to the end of today's meeting, unless anybody has some discussion.
I just had a discussion item real quick, just wondering if there was any status on the screening of mechanical units. The building that's there on the corner of Adams and Veterans.
The taller building that's visible off of the MP. I'm trying to remember where we last left that. It is still on the city's radar. It hasn't gone away. I think if I remember correctly, and I can look into this, I think we have a surety in place. I don't know. I see that Betty's also on the line. If I'm misstating that, if you wouldn't mind interrupting and letting us know. But I'll look into that and I'll give an update at the next meeting. I can do that.
Are you talking about 405?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I know that Liz last talked with the old owner. I'm trying to think. I'm sorry. I can't think of his name. Bill Trax. And she had some assurities by Bill. The things are progressing. That's the last I've heard, and that's probably been, I'm in a time warp, but probably 2 months ago.
Thank you.
Okay.
And then the end of Brown Street where it hits 36 that goes up to the bench. There was that little kind of long triangle lot that we looked at a couple of times. It had 3 industrial doors that faced the street that goes up to the bench. And it looks like they had, we went through design review and had them make some roofline articulations and stuff like that. And that the end result of that doesn't look like what we approved. It looks like there's just like a 2x6 wall that sticks up about 12 inches. And you can see the edge of the 2x6 wall thickness. It doesn't kind of come back into the building and look like the whole roof is actually articulated. So if someone can peek at that and make sure that's as intended, or maybe we approved it that way and missed it. And then additionally, Dogtopia looks great. I mean, Dogtopia, every time I drive by it, seems like the essence of what we're looking for has been executed. There's articulation on the street, there's articulation in the roof line, there's all sorts of different materials, there's a ton of glazing. It's just, it makes me happy doing what I do when I see one get executed like that. and I have no vested interest in it. It's just kind of a general comment of like, that looks good. That's what we want. So.
That's
Yep,
great.
agreed.
And then I didn't know that until just right now. So. All right, well, thank you. And we will look into both of those matters, and we appreciate all that you do, all the heavy lifting, and work on making Garden City better. Thank you.
Okay, thank
See
you
you
very
guys.
much. See you
Thank
guys.
you.
Have a
Bye.
good couple of weeks.
You too.
Bye.